Hello, and welcome to a talk about podcasting, embedded fittingly enough inside an episode of a podcast. I'm Dr. Gareth J. Johnson, the Managing Editor-in-Chief of Exchanges, the interdisciplinary research journal. I'm also the creator and host of the Exchanges Discourse podcast, so thanks for joining me. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the podcast genesis, reflecting on the production process experiences, along with providing guidance about creating and using podcasts to engage with new audiences, to hopefully inspire and inform any would-be podcasters listening. Podcasts are a format which, while not particularly new, have blossomed in popularity in recent years. Lockdown and remote working have especially caused people to seek out new forms of information, education and entertainment, so consequently potential listening audiences for them have grown. Notably, podcasts are easier to produce than video content, plus are readily consumable everywhere, at home, in the car, or even when you're out for a jog. There are too some suggestions that podcasts can be more engaging than other media because of the effective intimacy they offer audiences through listening intently to voices. Now, the Exchanges Journal was created in 2013 to promote an interdisciplinary discourse between early career researchers. Since I took it over 3 years ago, I've always thought that a spoken word accompaniment would permit a more authentic and appealing discursive element with which to complement our journal and additionally increase the title's visibility. Hence, when lockdown reduced my direct interaction with potential authors, I began to rethink the ways in which the title could re-engage with our community. Having been podcasting personally for many years, it was also a communication medium with which I was already heartily familiar, so introducing a companion podcast seemed an ideal way forward. Our earliest episodes using a single voice were always intended as a testbed to explore the format and production requirements while providing a foundation from which to build towards my desired configuration: discussions with guest speakers. Initially, I also wanted to gauge the institutional reactions, although my departmental ethos is one where experimentation is encouraged and failure merely a learning experience. Reactions, though, were pleasingly positive. Each episode is bookended by an introduction and a conclusion, which provide key branding and contact details and are sandwiched around the core episode content. This ensures any new listeners understand who we are and the podcast context too. Today, our main content is mostly guest speakers talking about their research and publication experiences, although a few episodes are solely myself, discussing aspects of editorial concern. Normally, a single guest is hosted per episode, although more have sometimes featured, notably increasing the episode's runtime in order to give everyone a fair chance to speak. Of course, a second speaker benefits listeners' attentions by varying tone and pace, alongside increasing the topics covered. We have slowly evolved to a roughly 15-minute standard runtime, largely because the episodes are intended to be bite-sized, although we have run longer at times. But it is essentially the format that we have used successfully for the past 2 years. In creating our content, there were 3 outline approaches we could have taken: unscripted, semi-scripted, and fully scripted. If you work with energized, inspirational speakers, a completely unscripted approach can produce exciting and dynamic content. However, it may require more post-production editing, with coherency relying on a combination of good improvisational speakers and an excellent host to steer each episode. Alternatively, being fully scripted means you can directly define and shape each episode's contents, and is an excellent way to utilise asynchronously recorded contributions edited together to form your podcast. It does require the most preparation and editing time though, and while it can also be the most on-brand approach, risks reducing the degree of spontaneity which often contributes a podcast's most exciting and engaging elements. For the Exchanges Discourse, I adopted a semi-scripted approach as offering the best of all worlds. The hosts Opening and closing contributions are scripted, while topics for discussion are predefined and shared with the guests ahead of recording, but are only used as a guide. Serendipitous discussions can also be embraced, but the overall shape of the episode is predefined, making editing each episode together easier. In this way, elements of spontaneity are retained, guests can speak knowledgeably, and deliver a more polished performance. The technical entry barriers to podcast creation are small. A smartphone or laptop can have good enough microphones to record dialogue, although a dedicated handheld recorder or desktop mic will offer greater audio fidelity. In terms of software, I use Zoom or Teams to record conversations. Audacity is then utilised to record the intro and outro of each episode, to filter out background noise and normalise sound levels in all recorded content. Finally, the audio is edited, removing unwanted pauses, muttering and misspeaking in Power Director. Now you can use Audacity for this last stage, but experience has shown me using a video editing tool for audio editing is a more time-effective approach. I adopted this mediated post-production approach as I found a more professional sounding final episode both enhanced listeners' engagement and raised favourable perceptions of the podcast. Editing each episode together takes around 4 times the length of the recording audio. And while I cut for timing and sometimes my own waffling, I aim to retain as much of any guest performance as possible. Providing episode transcripts can be a bonus in terms of content accessibility, and using Word 365's transcription function is a relatively efficient way to achieve this, although there is always a bit of hands-on textual cleanup required. Certainly, it's an area I'm considering making a more of a standard practice, as it helps our content reach broader audiences than speech alone. Distributing our finished podcast is also relatively easy. We host the Exchanges Discourse on the Anchor FM platform because it's free, simple to use, and because it is owned by Spotify, cascades every episode to multiple podcast platforms. This helps us reach more people than only those visiting our social media stream and website, although we do also highlight each new episode there too. A consequence of lockdown has been every celebrity or would-be influencer seems to have launched a podcast, so it is a crowded environment, which means you should expect to be cross-promoting your podcast alongside any other outputs. While episode quantity and production regularity can be an ambitious way to build a following, it can be a challenging schedule to maintain. Alternatively, quirky or original content may stand a better chance of standing out and gaining a following. Certainly, possessing a strong core concept alongside a clear conceptualization of your target audience will be a crucial consideration while you're establishing yourselves. There is no ideal length of podcast episode, as listeners' attention spans will vary hugely. But as with any kind of media, you are reliant on retaining your audience's attention. For the Exchanges Discourse, my aim was to produce something to be consumed over a cup of coffee. Longer podcasts exist and many work well, which is why some audience research will help in guiding you on listeners' ideal duration, although you may need to develop a different length as your podcast format and content matures. To date, there are over 20 Exchanges Discourse episodes with more speakers and guests lined up, and while our initial format has served us well, for the 3rd season I'm looking to revise and refresh our format based on our experiences. I believe, though, that we have achieved our initial goals for our podcasts in creating something which complements our journal. Potential guests now even approach me to appear, and people are clearly discussing episodes online too. Undoubtedly, we are reaching new audiences of the journal alone, and while many more listeners would be great, for now the podcast remains a secondary element of my role. But it remains an aspect I greatly enjoy creating, and something exciting which has grown within the headspace provided by remote working. For now, I've been Dr. Gareth J. Johnson, your host for this Exchanges Discord podcast. You can find us on Anchor FM, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Or to get in touch about our work, you can reach me at exchangesjournal@warwick.ac.uk or via exchanges.warwick.ac.uk. Thank you for listening.